Welcome everyone. Glad to see you on my channel. Today I will tell you about an unusual story, an amazing story about companionship and love. I wish you a pleasant audience. Mom, we've discussed this 1,000 times, Alex said tiredly. I'm marrying Wendy. Your Kate doesn't interest me at all. Well, I just don't feel anything for her. I told you that. I tried to go out with her, but it didn't work. What can you do? What's feelings got to do with it? Margaret flashed her arms. Marriage has nothing to do with feelings. And Wendy, your ragamuffin, what has she got to offer you? And does she have feelings? I know the type. Well, then I'll bring her to meet you. Say on Saturday night, and you and your father will see for yourselves how nice she is. So bring her, Mother replied with a sour face. Alex sighed heavily, knowing full well that this was hardly a good idea. On the other hand, what other options did he have? Mother and Wendy had to be made friends somehow. The tasks, of course, are loosely feasible. He had never seen two people so different before. But he didn't want to quarrel. Neither of them, both were dear to him in their own way. His parents became friends with Katya, saying she was a nice girl from a rich family. What was so good about her? She doesn't go to school or work. She sits on her parents' shoulders, loves expensive clothes, cosmetics, trips to expensive restaurants. You try to discuss something else with her. You don't even bother to pretend that she is interested. Alex, though, she didn't like him very much either. He was boring. She didn't like the way he dressed either. You're not a poor guy, but you look like a bum, was Kate's reaction when she saw him for the first time. It's embarrassing to go out with you. What exactly in his appearance caused such a reaction? The guy did not understand. Did he have to go to the meeting in a suit and tie, or she meant the lack of any status accessories? Well, he is a man. It's not like he's supposed to. He was dressed quite normally, jeans, sweater, boots, good new clothes, branded not from the mass market. What else do you need? However, against the background of Kate herself, almost from head to toe, covered with gold and diamonds, he really did not look the best. However, such pomposity and demonstration in public of all his riches, the young man did not like it in his own mother's behavior, but he was still willing to turn a blind eye to her quirks. In general, he and Kate did not develop any relationship. True, they did meet a few more times so as not to upset his parents too much. But that was the end of it. They decided it was better for both of them to try and find happiness somewhere else. Of course, the father and mother were not too happy about this. And on both sides, every now and then they arranged some chance meetings, hoping that the children would find a common language after all, like such a good batch you put out. So what if they don't like each other? That is not the main thing in marriage. Needless to say, the effect of such actions turned out exactly the opposite of what was expected by the older generation. After a couple of months of such a life, the young people not only couldn't see each other, they even didn't want to hear anything about the supposed bride or groom. Alex firmly declared to his parents, "It's enough that you have chosen my profession. I'll find my own wife." He really not long ago finished the medical institute, which he entered only because Mum and Dad wanted him to. They know best what he will need in life. And he is too young to make such serious decisions on his own. "You will be a dentist, open a private practice," said his father. "It's a lot of money, and the opportunity to make very useful connections. Let's be glad later that you did not go to yours, where you wanted. The conservatory. The Institute of Design and Technology," burled Alex. "That's a very promising direction now, too. But my parents, who seem to still be living somewhere in the 90s, did not want to hear about any other specialties." Alex, in his turn, had not waited for the moment when he would be glad that he had followed the path indicated by his parents. He's still the same. I was drawn to the world of high technology. I wanted some kind of creative fulfillment. In general, this confrontation with his parents was rooted in Alex's childhood. It seemed that he was born only to cause his mother's father nothing but frustration and unpleasantness. They didn't like anything about their son, starting with his very nature and his character. For one thing, he grew up very open and inquisitive, always ready to make new acquaintances and explore the unknown. This is what his parents, who live a withdrawn non-human. We could not understand what other friends in this world you can only count on yourself. Everyone else only wants to trick you into taking everything you have. Secondly, the boy loved to be the center of attention. At school, he constantly participated in various competitions and activities, regardless of the direction, whether it was a competition in running, Olympiad in mathematics, or a drawing contest for the school newspaper. Little Alex necessarily took part in these activities. Parents taught him something else. Sit quietly and keep your head down. No one should pay attention to you. You don't have to stand out from the crowd. Not a bad thing, not a good thing. If you're seen, you're bound to be a target for someone who's up to no good. Besides, they just didn't understand the point of their son being so active. He rarely took first place. Even getting into the top 3 finalists was a great achievement for him, and he could not explain to his parents that the main thing for him was not to win, but to participate. They just could not understand the concept as such. And thirdly, they categorically did not like the way Alex chose to dress. And this point somehow paradoxically contradicted the idea that you should be inconspicuous and keep your head down, because at the same time, his parents believed that his wealth should be demonstrated as brightly as possible. My mother always put on a lot of different kinds of jewelry that even my young son thought was tasteless. His father walked around in expensive suits, flaunting branded watches, diamond cufflinks, and tie. Needles, from their son's point of view, it all looked rather ridiculous. He preferred comfortable clothes, jeans, t-shirts, sneakers, soft sweaters, and things like that. Of course, this was also all bought in boutiques, or even tailored. But in appearance, it was not much different from the usual stuff. Unless, of course, you look at it with a professional eye. And this terribly irritated his father and mother, who thought that their son would disgrace them with this approach to appearance. As time went by, the differences only increased. Alex and his parents' attitude to money was completely different. It was as if the boy did not consider money to be a valuable commodity, and in general, something very important in life, while his father and mother almost prayed for it. Maybe it was because, unlike his parents, he had never been in a situation where money was missing, and yet it seemed strange to him to make a cult out of it. Sitting at home, shutting himself off from the world, and continuing to accumulate wealth that you already had more than you could spend in a lifetime. It was never a problem for him to make purchases, even big ones. Whereas his parents almost cried when they had to part with their money. A new scandal erupted over enrollment. For some reason, my father and mother had it into their heads that the most promising profession of our time was dentistry. Like, everyone's teeth are bad now, so the money will be shoveled. They didn't want to hear any objections. And in the end, Alex still had to give in and go where they said. And now another reason for quarreling. When the son finished college, his parents decided that now it was the right time for him to get married. No one, of course, cared if the young man was ready for such responsibility, and much less whether he had any feelings for his bride. They had found a good girl. Everybody get married. And in their mind, the word good had only one meaning: richer. But then Alex rebelled. Okay, studies, profession, and everything else. But he will choose a life partner himself, because he, not his parents, will see this woman in his house every day, talk to her, and after all, sleep with her. He wants to raise his children and build a family life together. No, he will not allow anyone to make this decision for him. For a while, the father with mother seemed resigned to the fact that Kate would not be their bride. Probably realized the son was quite serious. In addition, he actually managed to get a job as a dentist in one of the leading clinics in the city. And this is the first step to a successful career in the profession. Or maybe they still hoped that their son would grow up and wise up, and still agree with their choice. Maybe not now, but in a couple of years. But there was no hurry, and in that time the girl's mind will clear up, and she will realize that she couldn't find a better husband than their son. So there is a truce established in the family. But that was until one day Alex announced that he had found a girl that he intended to marry. And that was half the trouble. His chosen one was not some promising bride from a good family, but the most ordinary flower sales clerk. That's when his parents remembered Kate again. Attempts were renewed to bring the two together. At the same time, Margaret tried in every way to convince her son that Vendy was not his type, that he would regret such a rash decision, and that it was only his parents' money that this girl wanted from him. No words about the fact that Vendy was a nice girl from a decent, even if not a rich family, they did not want to hear. In fact, the word decent was almost considered a swear word in this house. At best, it was used as a synonym for stupid. Alex tried his best to avoid quarrels and scandals, but was adamant in his choice. He met Vendy by chance and fell in love with her almost at first sight. And it was not even in her appearance, though she was quite pretty, but much more in the soul of Alex Fell. Her character, kindness, responsiveness, willingness to help complete strangers in a critical situation. The fact was that the circumstances of their acquaintance were quite unusual. On a sunny Sunday morning, the guy was simply walking down the street of his hometown. He often took such long walks, finding in them some peace and a break from the hustle and bustle of the left wing and rather joyless, everyday life. And then a picture caught his eye that made his heart skip a beat or two. An elderly man was crossing the road in a crosswalk. It was obvious that the old man couldn't see very well, and he had obvious problems with his legs. He was leaning on a stick, and everything seemed fine. Yes, but the driver who let him pass was impatient. Alex always knew this kind of behavior on the road. More than once he had almost been run over by overly hurried motorists, who did not stop before crossing, but only slightly reduced the speed, continuing to move and dooming accidentally slipping pedestrians to the inevitable fall under the car. And now the grandfather, not noticing this danger, hesitated right on the road, and Alex didn't know what it was about. He was too far away, but either the stick slipped at the most inopportune moment or the pensioner dropped something. The guy saw the car coming straight at him and understood that a hit and run was inevitable. He threw himself in that direction, but felt there was nothing he could do in time. At that moment, a girl appeared literally out of nowhere. At least Alex didn't see her anywhere nearby. With one jerk, she literally pulled the old man already almost out from under the wheels. Then she watched him carefully and began to move him across the road. That's when the young man arrived. He joined the stranger, and they safely brought the grandfather to the other side. The man thanked them profusely and admired the fact that there were still such brave and selfless people who were willing to help. Alex, too, admired this fact, and he offered to escort the girl home. She did not refuse. On the way, he managed to get a good look at her pretty face. A nice figure, she was dressed rather modestly, but quite stylishly, not pretentiously, without excessive jewelry. He liked her more and more. "My name is Alex," he introduced himself on the way. "What's yours? I'm Vendy," smiled the girl. "And let's start talking on a first-name basis. If you, of course, do not mind. I don't like to go to the end. It makes me feel 20 years older." "I do not mind." Alex happily responded. Nathan noticed another pleasant similarity between them. "Vendy told me that she came to town relatively recently and immediately got a job in a flower store, so that she could eat and pay her rent. She liked her job. She was very open, loved to communicate with people. In addition, she understood something about floristry. so it was the perfect job for her. Before that, she lived on her parents' farm. It was nice there, of course. Fresh air, products from their own garden and all that. But still, country life wasn't very appealing to her. No one to talk to, nowhere to go. So she decided to look for happiness in the city. She liked life here much more than in her native land. Alex said some things about himself. For example, that he worked as a dentist, but that was not at all what he wanted. Even a little about his dreams and problems. It was as if he felt he could trust this girl. He did not say a word about his parents' wealth, though, just so he wouldn't embarrass or scare away his new acquaintance. At the end of the walk, they exchanged phone numbers. To Alex's surprise, the very next day, Wendy texted him first. She suggested we go for a walk in the park. After work, she promised to show him some interesting places that few people had seen, even locals. He gladly agreed. That is how it worked out for them. They saw each other almost every day. They sometimes went for a walk, sometimes to a cafe, sometimes to a movie. When they could not, they actively communicated by telephone and shared their joys and feelings. At first, their relationship was purely friendly with no hint of romance. At least on Wendy's part. She was interested in spending time with Alex. But there was no hint that she felt anything in more. He himself was head over heels in love with her from the first moment he saw her. Gradually, however, the young people were getting closer to each other. Their relationship somehow smoothly and imperceptibly flowed to a new level. Alex himself did not understand how it happened, so that one day, sitting in a movie theater at some rather boring movie, they began to kiss. It seemed that it was Wendy who took the initiative at that moment. He was a little bit more than 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 a little bit. After this incident, it finally became clear that these two were now a couple. There was a tenderness in their conversations and correspondence that they could not have afforded when they were just friends. Now they were admitting their feelings for each other openly and were no longer going on friendly meetings, but on very real dates. Alex hesitated to give his now girlfriend a bouquet of flowers, though he really wanted to do it. It was all about her work. She was a Flores, after all, and understood such things. And he was very much afraid of making a mistake, of picking something out wrong. Of course, he could leave the choice to her colleagues. But what if they weren't as good as she was? So he gave her anything. Candy, jewelry, nice little trinkets, but not flowers. It must be said, however, that these gifts were mutual. Wendy liked to pamper her boyfriend with something nice, too, and just as he himself gave him compliments. Finally, Alex found a very peculiar solution to his problem. He went to the store where Wendy worked shortly before closing time and announced, "I'm looking for the perfect bouquet for a very special girl. I was also told that you are the best florist in this town. What kind of flowers does your special girl prefer?" Wendy played him. "You tell me." With a laugh, he replied. That's how he found out that Wendy prefers simple wildflowers, finding some special charm in them. This touch was another in a long list of things he liked so much about this girl. He felt truly happy with her and soon proposed to his beloved, to which she happily agreed. His parents, of course, understood that their son had developed some love interest, but for the time being they did not ask him anything. Perhaps they hoped that he was going out with Kate, or at least some other girl equal to him in status and wealth. Alex, for his part, was also in no hurry to tell them the whole truth, knowing that it would not make them happy. But after the young people decided to get married, it was just impossible to keep silent. So he honestly told his parents about the woman he had chosen, just as he had expected. This news caused a big scandal. His mother cried and clutched at her heart. His father shook his head disapprovingly. And now he had to introduce these completely different, but so close to him, and preferably make sure that his mother and Wendy did not quarrel at all. At the beginning of the evening, he had not even expected more. Now he had to tell Wendy that his parents were well-known businessmen who owned a chain of furniture stores in the city. As he had expected, this left the girl in a state of mild shock. She wasn't sure she was ready to meet such serious people, but Alex convinced her everything would go smoothly and she got along with his parents, though of course he himself had very little faith in that. Doubts could be read in his bride's eyes as well, and yet she came. From the look in his mother's eyes, he knew Wendy didn't like her right away. She was dressed tastefully, but very modestly. No eye-catching jewelry hanging around, just a thin bracelet and small earrings, very pretty to Alex's eye. But undoubtedly it was only costume jewelry, not jewelry. Margaret wore almost half of the jewelry. Margaret wore almost half of the jewelry she had on herself in honor of the encounter. All the best to show her who she was dealing with. It was her usual habit. Her son didn't like it, of course, but he couldn't tell his mother what to wear and what not to wear. The table, too, was lavishly set. The finest delicacies you could find. The food was in absolutely obscene quantities, and there was also expensive wine. The best crockery and cutlery were brought out for serving. Alex realized that this was just another way of checking. How would the girl behave? Would she pounce on the food? Would she try to steal the golden spoon? It was, of course, all very unpleasant and humiliating. With every action, Alex's parents showed that they were not at all happy about his fiancée, though they still maintained an outwardly friendly demeanor. And of course, poor Wendy could not help feeling their relationship. It was obvious that she was very uncomfortable in this huge, luxuriously furnished apartment. Contrary to usual, she behaved stiffly and withdrawn, hardly speaking, only answering questions. In addition, she hardly touched the food, despite the fact that she had hardly ever tasted the exquisite dishes that the future mother-in-laws put on the table. Who are your parents? What do they do? Then, Alex's father sounded like he was interrogating a suspect in some very heinous crime. They're farmers. They have their own little for such things, has intensified reluctantly. Alex's parents had to stop their machinations with supposedly high-end furniture and start doing business more honestly. By this time, though, they had accumulated enough money that it didn't affect their well-being too much. Of course, with this approach to life, they did not have time to make friends. They saw any outsider as someone who wanted a piece of their wealth, so they lived a reclusive life. Of course, the arrival of such an unsuitable bride for their son did not make them happy at all. They had expected him to marry a girl from a richer family, perhaps even from a big city. That was Kate, whose parents they had somehow managed to gain the trust of, and even arranged to marry. And then, to the disappointment of both families, naughty children ruined their plans. Margaret was seething with anger and resentment. Her future daughter-in-law was driving her mad, and she saw her son's behavior as nothing short of treachery. But it was beyond her power to prevent the approaching wedding. Alex stood his ground. That's why she decided that she would go to the reception and show these rednecks. Where did they belong? Preparations for the forthcoming ceremony went on for another 6 months. Finally, everything was ready, and the solemn day came. First, the young couple went to the registry office, where the parents of both the bride and the groom were to be with them. Alex's family showed up at the very last moment, almost too late for the time of the wedding. Margaret was clearly intent on shocking them just by the look of her custom-made dress, was embroidered with gold threads and adorned with real diamonds. The various pieces of jewelry on her seemed to be several kilograms. Alex noticed that she wore a set of very expensive stones, which were almost always lying at home, safely locked in a box. A diode necklace, a pair of bracelets, and massive earrings. It was a very dainty set, very expensive, but didn't really take with the rest of his mother's style. More accurately, the boy always wondered where such things could even come from in her closet. But he understandably didn't ask any questions. Of course, in addition to this set, she had put on a bunch of various other jewelry, which completely killed all the charm of the fine jewelry. Yet Margaret thought she was irresistible. It wasn't how it looked on her that mattered to her. The main thing was to show that she could afford to go out looking like that. The bride's parents were dressed very modestly and even somewhat unassuming in comparison to Margaret's glittering attire. Her mother wore a simple and rather austere dress, small silver earrings and a bracelet. Her father confined himself to a simple suit, pants, jacket, tie, white shirt. Nothing extra. This is my mother, Nicole, and this is my father, David. It's a pleasure, Margaret replied, as if the mere sight of them made her sick. After the wedding at the registry office, the whole company moved to the restaurant. Of course, the most expensive and fancy restaurant in town. The mother of the groom insisted on it, accepting the fact that she could not prevent this outrageous thing under the codename wedding, decided to head it. All preparations must be clearly coordinated with her. Even the dress for Vendi was sewn by her personal dressmaker. That's why it turned out the way Margaret herself would have worn. Bulky, puffy, uncomfortable, overly luxurious, and pretentious. The bride herself would never have chosen it. But she thought it best not to quarrel with her lover's mother, and now her parents are here to thwart her mother-in-law's plans to ruin the ceremony. Of course, from Margaret's own point of view, it would take a lot to come to a wedding dressed like that. It's no surprise, though. David, meanwhile, was looking at the wedding with some strange interest. The same set of jewelry she'd worn for the first time in years. He didn't look as delighted as she would have expected, but rather sullen and sad. He never said anything about it, though. But Margaret, who had run out of words by then, found that they were envious. She chuckled, noticing the bride's father's interest. "I bet you'd like to buy the same jewelry for your wife. You don't even have enough money for gold. Silver's too much. That's your only set." Alex's face went bright red. The scandal he had expected back at his parents' reunion with his fiancée seemed to have erupted right at the wedding. His mother's behavior made him want to fall on the spot. Trying to smooth things over, he poured some juice into her glass and tried to change the conversation to the weather. But that did not help. "What did you bring as a present for our children?" "A bundle of hay, a jar of milk, or maybe fresh manure, or whatever is the custom in your villages." Vendi's parents were ignoring these horseshoes, talking to their daughter and her fiancé in a low voice. Everyone present now tried to pretend that they did not hear Alex's mother's words. All except Ben, nodding approvingly at each word of his wife and whispering something in her ear. It must be hints. What other words can hurt the dear guests? Complete disregard for her attempts to cause a scandal. Margaret cried even more. No matter how hard I tried to get all the liquor away from her, she kept trying to hint at alcohol, and in the end she gave out some very unseemly tirade which boiled down to the fact that poverty was the greatest disgrace there could be in life. And now these people have come to her son's wedding specifically to infect her family with this shame. Of course it sounded much more expressive and profane when she said it. "Get out of here, you miserable bums." She finished. Tears came to Vendi's eyes at this injustice, and her parents stood up in silence and headed for the exit. Margaret had a triumphant expression on her face. Her husband was smiling too. David stopped for a moment at the door and said quietly but clearly, "You shouldn't do that, Margaret. You'll regret it." At that, the groom's mother grinned, pleased with the effect. But to her disappointment, Alex and Vendi didn't stay long either. They left the ceremony after the bride's parents, not quite sure what they should do now. They wandered through the streets of their native and so beloved city until dark. They had to go back home, whether they wanted to or not. And the worst thing for Vendi was that now they would have to live in her mother-in-law's house. That was what they had agreed to before the ugly scandal. Of course, they could have said no and moved into a rented apartment, but Alex did not want to hear about it. "Listen," he said, "I am very ashamed of my mother." But the alcohol spoke for her, you know. She did not realize what she was saying. Besides, we had agreed that it would not be good if we just replayed everything. Let's try to live with them. And if it doesn't work out, if things get really bad, we'll go." Vendi understood that her now husband loved his parents no matter what, and did not want to upset them, so she did not agree to the proposal and had many times to regret that decision. And it began as soon as the young people returned from a wedding that had ended so unsuccessfully. Alex's parents, of course, managed to get home and even sobered up a little. Understandably, this fact did not improve the mood of the mother-in-law. She immediately threw a huge scandal. The main themes were two. Betty's parents unscrupulously disrupted the wedding, and somewhere the newlyweds are. Walking around till late at night. The girl wanted to turn around and leave right on the spot. It didn't even matter with or without her husband. But somehow Alex managed to convince her to stay. Living in this house with these people was extremely uncomfortable. In addition, the two of them continued about the same line of behavior that they had taken at the wedding toward her parents. Only now they did it more carefully so Alex wouldn't hear. Of course, Vendi had to do all the housework. She had to cook for everyone and clean and everything else she could think of. Usually in wealthy homes, this is done by specially hired people, but Alex's parents were against letting any strangers into their apartment. So my mother-in-law had to do all the housework herself until there was someone to do it all for her, and to reproach her with impunity if something wasn't done the way she wanted. There were, of course, all sorts of faults. Was it a joke to clean 6 enormous rooms all by yourself? And that's not counting the very spacious kitchen and 2 large bathrooms? Margaret seemed to notice her every mistake and commented caustically on everything her daughter-in-law did. Of course, without moving away from her favorite rustic theme. Who wiped the dust like that? I thought country girls were trained to run a household. It's you in your village who'll be walking around the house in slippers, but in a decent house, you'd be good enough to wear decent shoes. Why do you eat that with a spoon? Didn't you have forks in your village? And all in the same spirit? And Vendi was well aware that if you respond to it somehow symmetrically, and she had options, she was waiting for another grand scandal. And the mother-in-law managed to twist it all around as if she were the main victim here. And the daughter-in-law was to blame for everything that happened. So she tried to do everything that happened. So she tried to do everything that was required of her in silence and rarely get in front of her mother-in-law, which was not so easy. Obviously, the woman herself was diligently looking for reasons for conflict and not finding any real reasons, just made them up. And most importantly, there was nothing Vendi could do about such injustice. After all, they were living in Alex's parents' house after all, so they had to abide by the rules set by the owners, no matter how stupid and wrong they might seem, or move into their own apartment and live there the way they want. However, Margaret very rarely opposed such initiatives. More precisely, Vendi, she herself would have been happy to kick out. But she did not want to let her beloved son go. However, the girl was beginning to suspect that her presence in the apartment gave her mother-in-law some pleasure. Purely sadistic property. One way or another, living in the same apartment with her husband's relatives was becoming increasingly difficult, and no one was going to let them out of that evil lair. Alex's complaints about her mother's behavior were fruitless. "Please," he said, "have a little more patience. They will get used to you. They will see how good you are." "You'll see, Alex," tiredly answered Vendi. "I understand that you love your mother and I love mine, and she probably loves your mother, and she probably loves you too in her own way, and that's why I'll never be good for her. She just thinks you deserve better." "Who could be better than you?" Alex wondered demonstratively and smoothly shifted the conversation to more pleasant topics. No one knows how long Vendi would have lasted in such an environment and how it would have ended. But after a few long and tedious weeks, the problem was solved in the most unexpected way. And it began when her own parents came to the house where she and her husband lived, choosing just when her mother-in-law was at her house. "And what on earth are you doing here?" Margaret said disapprovingly. "Go away." By this time they were sitting in the living room, where the daughter and her husband had brought them. His parents had gone out to see who had the nerve to come into their dwelling and find out why the children had put them up. After all, they were both clearly told, no guests are to be in the house of everyone else's friends. Here, home is a fortress into which no stranger should enter. This house is as much mine as it is yours, Alex retorted. So please don't make a scene and throw yourself at my guests. David, for his part, behaved much more confidently than he had at the wedding. Seated on the couch, he looked directly into Margaret's eyes and smiled broadly. For some reason, the woman couldn't stand that open and penetrating stare for long, and soon dropped her eyes to the floor. And now it's time to end this whole circus. I am well aware of the machinations that have brought you the riches with which you are so treated. At these words, Ben's face went pale, and his wife, on the contrary. It was obvious that both of them were knocked out by Vendy's father's words. Nevertheless, when Margaret spoke, the defiant intonation had not yet disappeared from her voice. What are you going to accuse me of in your own house? We are honest men. All our hard-earned money. Of course he wouldn't understand that. You villagers aren't used to making money. All you can do is whine. How unhappy you are and how you are unfairly offended. That's enough, Margaret, David interrupted her. We've heard enough of you at the wedding. Now you listen to me. The money may be hard-earned, of course, but not yours. You only stole something that belonged to someone else. To demand it back and hold you accountable. But in order to do that, the lady of the house had to be dead. To inject a drug, large doses of which induce a heart attack. It wasn't hard for you. You were already doing all the medical procedures she needed. So, the poor woman never suspected a thing. Neither did the investigating authorities. And then it was easy. Take the money out of the safe and leave the house as if you had never been there. Robert lived in seclusion. No family, no friends, no heirs. Only a young daughter. Of all the servants in the house, you two were the only ones left, working, understandably, unofficially. So it was impossible to connect you with this house and this family. No one would have suspected anything. I remember the woman's body was found a few days later, and that's because the letter carrier was disturbed by the cries of a hungry child. You probably hoped that the girl would not survive, but she was lucky. She had to live in an orphanage for a while, though. Not for long, really. But even if she had survived, she would never have known who her parents were. The perfect plan, having carried it out, did you lay low for a while? You didn't need any extra attention at all, especially since Ben had just been whistled out of the service for bribery. True, as was the custom at the time, he was quietly dismissed without any prosecution or confiscation of the loot. A good explanation of where you got your money from. Back then, such things were in the order of the day. No one would have been surprised or suspicious when the story with the missing valuables was forgotten. You started your own business. Gradually, your income grew. The stolen money was laundered. You are now the owners of a perfectly legitimate business. Respectable people. But in fact, you are thieves and murderers. And I wouldn't have found out anything about you if you hadn't wanted to show off your wife Robert's jewelry on that unfortunate day. As I told you, I have a photographic memory. I didn't think I'd ever have to remember that story. I quit my job a year after those events. I couldn't save a patient. A very young boy literally died in my arms. The commission decided that I was guilty. They banned me from practicing medicine for several years. After that case, I wouldn't risk returning to the ambulance service myself. I went to the country, became a farmer. There was a deadly silence in the living room. No one dared utter a word. Everyone was trying to comprehend what Vendy's father had just told them, and mother-in-law and father-in-law were sitting quietly, silently, as if they had taken a couch. It was frightening to look at Alex. The story of his parents' criminal past had put the boy in a state of deep shock. Waiting a little longer, David added something else to his story. Remember the little girl you left in the great empty house next to the body of her mother, murdered by you? You hoped so much that the child would die. But she survived that the child would die. But she survived. She was sent to an orphanage first, but almost immediately she was adopted. She didn't even realize what had happened. And until recently, she had no idea who she was. And me, I found her when I started on the case. I recognized her from the mole on her neck. I delivered a baby, and I remembered exactly what she looked like. But you know what the best part is. Who adopted her? The city attorney general. How much jail time do you think you'll get? When Lydia's new daddy finds out how you treated his beloved daughter, whom he loves like his own. If anyone had any doubts about the story up to that point, David, then after these words they completely fell away. It was because Alex's parents jumped up and, without saying a word to anyone, began to pack quickly, leaving everything they could carry in the bag. They left the apartment in a hurry, obviously not intending to return to it. I guess they're going to leave town as soon as possible, smirked David. Don't we have to stop them? Vendy asked worriedly. I guess I forgot to mention that the city attorney already knows about this. I went to him in the first place, just to keep them from escaping. It was just painful to watch Alex. It must be hard to know that your parents, whom you loved so much, were thieves and murderers. Yes, sure, they had their fights and misunderstandings, but still, like any child, he treated them as well as he could. And here was this. Vendy quietly walked over to her husband and hugged him tightly. She was well aware of how much he needed care and support right now. Besides, he probably thought that now, having learned the truth about his family, his wife might decide that she didn't need such a husband. Children, of course, should not be responsible for the sins of their fathers. But not everyone understands this simple truth. With one gesture, she showed him that she was on his side. Whatever it was, they would get through it together and deal with it together. Her parents didn't hold a grudge against Alex either. He had always treated them with respect. He did not support his father and mother in their horrible behavior. David and his wife left that evening to go back to the farm, which they could not leave unattended for long. As a farewell, they invited the children to visit sometime, to which they gladly agreed. But now they had better things to do. For example, to deal with the property which needed to be returned to the rightful owner. She did not take long, however, and after a few days she showed up on the doorstep of the apartment, where Vendy and Alex still lived. She did not arrive alone, but was accompanied by her foster father. They were invited into the house. Tea was poured, and they were invited to make themselves comfortable on the sofa in the living room. Everyone understood that they were going to have a difficult conversation. To begin with, the prosecutor said in a very formal tone, I must inform you, Alex, that nobody is accusing you personally of anything. We understand that you couldn't have known about the machinations that your parents were turning before you were born. That's why no action will be taken against you. Alex sighed with evident relief. Admittedly, honestly, he really feared that some suspicion might fall on him as well. After all, he turns out the son of criminals enjoyed these benefits. It is only unclear why it happened that he grew up quite unlike on these two. However, all kinds of amazing things happen in this world. Second, the prosecutor continued in the meantime. Your parents were detained on their way out of town. They are awaiting trial, and I am afraid they will be in prison for a long time, but they may need your help in clearing up a few details. You must understand that you have the right not to testify against close relatives. Nevertheless, we have enough evidence as it is. But you can make our work easier if you want to, of course. Sure, I'll help you, Alex responded. It's my chance to do something about the damage my parents did. The prosecutor nodded, seemingly satisfied with that answer, and looked expressively at his daughter. Until this moment, who had remained silent. It was hard to believe the girl was adopted. She looked so much like her father. Perhaps it was all in her facial expression and demeanor, which she had completely adopted from the prosecutor. When she spoke into her speech, one could hear his intonations. I wanted to look at you before I finally direct this decision. I see now that I was not mistaken, Alex. I won't claim my parents' money back. I don't think you deserve the reduction in living standards that is sure to follow. If I take everything you have. Thank you. Of course, the young man replied, shaken to his core. But I don't want anything that isn't mine. And what about yourself? I'm doing fine by myself, she smiled. My father is a prosecutor, and my mother earns a lot of money. So we can't complain about poverty. Think of it as our wedding present, for both of you. Don't say no. This exchange of pleasantries went on for quite some time. But in the end, not without her father's help, they managed to convince the young people that her decision was the best possible one. Thus, all the money Alex's parents had saved was at their complete disposal. It should be said that they gave most of it to charity, leaving themselves only the necessities. It was decided to sell 2 big apartments of my parents. Instead of it, they bought a cozy 3-room flat with a view to possible expansion of the family. And soon after that, it actually took place. But so far, not quite in the way one would expect. As part of their charity work, the guys stopped by the city's shelter for homeless animals. They brought food, diapers, blankets, and toys. Some medicine. In a word, all that is so necessary in any such institution. In addition, they were going to discuss with the owner the possibility of expanding the area, if he has enough money for that. Of course, visiting such a place, it is impossible not to get acquainted with its furry inhabitants. All the more so because Vendi, who grew up outside the city, is used to the company of different animals, and she lacked that in the city. Of course, the young people left the shelter in the company of a couple of large fluffy cats. They were both adults, and one was also blind in one eye. Clearly, they had almost no chance of finding a home, especially since it was the couple who wanted to give them away, since the animals had been inseparable since their early childhood, when their elderly owner died. The heirs did not want to take care of the cats and gave them to a shelter. Everyone thought that they were destined to spend the rest of their lives in a cramped cage. This story touched Vendi's heart, and she persuaded her husband to take the animals with him. With the money left over, Alex was able to quit his job, which he didn't love with all his heart, and enroll in the institute where he wanted to go. Now he was getting a second college degree and hoped to have a good career in the IT field. Trial of his parents took place fairly quickly. David was able to confirm all the facts he told them during the trial. Both defendants behaved disgustingly, trying to shift all the blame for the crimes committed on each other. Nevertheless, the wife received 20 years in prison, and the husband is 15, and, given their age, it is unlikely that they will ever be able to go free again, no matter what. At first, Alex went to see them, but after a while he stopped. The reason was the unacceptable behavior of his parents, who blamed him and his wife for all their problems. And what happened to them when he told them that he had decided to change his profession? In short, after 6 months of such meetings, the father and mother finally quarreled with their son, whom they considered a real traitor. All the more so, they were aware of his assistance to the investigation. They heard rumors that most of their stolen wealth had been sent to charity. "There is no need to come here anymore," his father said to him during his last visit. "After all you have done. No, we have no more son." His mother did not want to see him at all, and Alex took the breakup hard. But in the end he decided that maybe it was for the best. He had nothing more to say to these people who were no longer remorseful for their terrible actions, but preferred to blame anyone else for their fate but themselves. Vendi's parents. The young people visit quite often. They just stop by to talk and help out around the house, despite their father-in-law's objection. Alex has bought some new equipment for the firm and also helped to rebuild a large house instead of the dilapidated structure in which the farmers were forced to live before. An offer to sell the land altogether and buy a bigger one was firmly declined by David. How the two of us will manage with such a farm, son, he said judiciously. No, we can manage with what we have, and you've streamlined things so nicely for us. At the insistence of Vendi, they repeated the wedding this time, as the newlyweds themselves wanted. In addition to their parents, the girls invited their friends, of whom both had quite a few. They also invited the city attorney and his daughter, who happily accepted the invitation. In the family of Vendi and Alex, all was well. They almost did not quarrel, and just like before they were married, they went on a date, spending a lot of time with each other. However, it is likely that soon they will no longer have that opportunity. After all, the woman is expecting a child. This is good news, Robert. Remember him? I can see by your faces that you do. We don't know any Robert, Margaret protested. Do you know what gave you away? Vendi's father continued without paying any attention to her. Your desire to show your superiority. You wore the best jewelry you had for the wedding, didn't you? You didn't think the villagers would know what the stones were, or who they belonged to, did you? Didn't they? I recognized that set right away. I saw it in person on Robert's wife. I was an empt at the time, and it just so happened that it was our team that took the woman to the maternity hospital. She gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. The only thing that spoiled the impression was a big mole on her neck, very conspicuous. A year later, both she and her husband found themselves in the middle of a gang war. It was the 90s. Robert himself died, and his wife was paralyzed. A stray bullet grazed her spine. It was a high-profile case. It was all over the city papers, so you couldn't have missed it. But here's the interesting thing. About a year later, the woman herself died. The doctors thought it was a heart attack. She could not stand the death of her husband and the miserable existence that followed. The poor girl, their daughter, ended up in an orphanage. But the most interesting thing was that all their money, their jewelry, had disappeared. Then it is clear that no one got involved. You never know what would turn up in the process. No one needed this kind of trouble. As a matter of fact, I wasn't interested either. I'm not a cop, just an ambulance doctor. It's not my business to dig into criminal histories. But I remembered those decorations very well. What can you do? I was lucky with my memory. And at the wedding, I look at you exactly this set. That's when I guessed what happened to this family. Everyone held their breath as they listened to David's story, and Alex's parents were somehow hushed and shrunken. They seemed to be trying to pretend that they weren't in the room at all. The young man's own face stretched more and more as more details were revealed. He guessed, of course, that his parents had not obtained their fortune by the most honest means. But he had no idea it was that bad. You, as I understand, having heard about this story, felt that it was a good deal. The narrator went on. You must have taken a job as a nurse to the dead man's wife and looked after her, and somebody had to look after her, and somebody had to look after the child. I don't suppose you had any trouble finding out the code to the safe. Maybe his wife even gave it to you so you could get her something. She trusted you and didn't expect any tricks. You took such good care of her and her daughter. And in the meantime, you were thinking of the best way to run your scam and take her money. You knew how rich this family was, but of course it was scary to steal openly, just in case the woman could recover from her injury. And then you realized that there was only one way to get your treasure out of the safe so that no one else could.